Since the beginning of the defund the police movement or the abolish the police movement, there have been many people arguing the real goal here was to federalize or nationalize police so that local jurisdictions would have less control over what their police do. That may be the case. Some said that they were going to bring in the National Guard and have them effectively police the streets. But it may actually be that there's going to be some kind of federalization of local policing, at least at the intelligence level. We're now learning that the Capitol Police are setting up field offices around the U.S. Why? Well, they've got to hunt down the dangerous rioters from January 6th. And of course, this may evolve into something else. I have a prediction. It could be wrong. I'm not saying I'm reading the future or guaranteeing this will happen. But I believe there's a strong possibility that once the Capitol Police finish their investigation of the Capitol rioters, they will say, well, now we need to look at some of the people who supported the Capitol riot. We need to start looking at those who are on the periphery, who maybe didn't go to D.C., but provided material support to those who did. In which case, the Capitol Police will evolve into something entirely different. Perhaps an intelligence-based protective agency is one way to call it. In fact, that's literally what they're calling themselves now. As the Capitol Police begin to expand and go after more people around the country with these new field offices, they're saying they want to pivot. So perhaps that is the end result. Perhaps defund the police was less relevant, and the real goal is to have some kind of national level control over local level politics. This should be worrying. The war on terror, as we've seen it over the past several decades, is coming home. Of course, a lot of people have criticized this, but I think we're only just now seeing the beginning of how bad it's really going to be. The Biden administration is saying things like white supremacy and the far right are the real threats. They completely ignore all of the damage and the rioting from the far leftists demanding we defund or abolish the police. Perhaps because it's a twofold assault. Propaganda, physical assault as well, but twofold in the sense that you've got the attack on the Capitol, the riot, being really, really bad, but being used as a justification as the mainstream media rams this down our throats, claiming that it was the worst attack on the U.S. since the Civil War. You know, that's at least what many prominent Democrats are saying. And in the meantime, Antifa acts a fool, rampages through cities, burns down buildings along with Black Lives Matter. And many on the left support the actions, be it Kamala Harris seeking to bail out some of these people. And then you have a complete demoralization of local police and a bolstering of the Capitol Police. You see how that works? At the local level, police have their hands tied behind their backs by progressive DAs. In San Francisco, where crime is so bad, 40% of people polled in SF say they are planning on leaving because of crime and the quality of life declining. In Chesa Bowden, the progressive DA says it's just because they're racist. So there you have it. The progressive DAs come in, let criminals get away with it. The police feel like they can't do anything, so they stop doing anything or start quitting, resigning en masse. And then in D.C., the Capitol Police say we need more resources to go after this true extremist threat, and now we must expand around the U.S. Pay attention to this. I could be wrong about all of it. Maybe they're just some field offices. Or perhaps in 10 or 20 years, the Capitol Police will have a new name or the same name, and they'll be in every state, and they'll be run by the federal government, and they will supersede what the states can do and what the states want. Right now, it's long been said the feds have little power to do anything, especially with these Second Amendment sanctuary zones. I think around 2/3 of all counties in the U.S. are Second Amendment sanctuaries, meaning the people, the law enforcement there, legally cannot assist the feds in going after people for, say, gun control. Many people have pointed out the FBI and other federal law enforcement agencies, they don't have the manpower to actually deal with all of the crime that may be occurring in this country. So what happens when the Capitol Police use January 6th as a mandate to expand around the U.S., and then you actually get federal police in every major jurisdiction? Then the feds can. That's a massive expansion of federal authority. Well, let's read exactly what's happening. I have this story from the Daily Mail talking a little bit about everything, but I also have the actual statement from the United States Capitol Police on what their plan is. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member in order to get access to our exclusive members only area of the website. Now, I can't actually click that and show you on the screen what we have for you in the members only area because YouTube would ban me. No joke. I can't even show you the title of one of our bonus podcasts with Dr. Chris Martenson because he talks about some issues that YouTube says we're not allowed to talk about. If you want to hear these conversations, go to timcast.com, become a member. But more importantly, when you sign up, you're helping us fund real journalists. We have already produced, I think, over 100 articles in the past couple of weeks. We are bringing on more journalists and we are expanding. We're going to be hiring fact checkers. We're going to be creating our own fact checking division. And we have a new show about a few weeks away on the unexplained mysteries, murder, true crime, etc. That's what you're getting when you support our work, and you're helping us do more of the work we're doing here. So don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with your friends. If you're listening on a podcast, whatever, give us a good review. But let's read from uscp.gov what they're doing. And maybe it's not as bad as we think. Maybe there won't be a massive push for a national police force, or maybe it's actually worse than we think. You know, they're not going to come out right away and say, here's our grand plan for a federalized police force. They may just come out and say, oh, don't worry, just a few regional offices for the Capitol Police. They're not the Capitol Police anymore. Now they're, a bunch of other states as well. After the attack, the future of the U.S. Capitol Police. They say in a press release, it has been 6 months since rioters attacked the U.S. Capitol, and our brave police officers and law enforcement partners who fought valiantly to protect elected leaders and the democratic process. We will never forget USCP officers Brian Sicknick and Howie Liebengood, who died after the attack, nor the sacrifices of the nearly 150 law enforcement officers who were injured. Now, let me pause right there and say, in regards to Brian Sicknick, apparently he died of natural causes. I believe he had a stroke. It was unrelated to the events of the Capitol. Of course, this is what they need to justify the expansion and the demand for more power. They say since that day, our team has been working with federal law enforcement agents to track down the suspects and bring them to justice. So far, more than 500 defendants face charges. Throughout the last 6 months, the U.S. Capitol Police has been working around the clock with our congressional stakeholders to support our offices, enhance security around the Capitol complex, and pivot towards an intelligence-based protective agency. Interesting. They say USCP continues to implement recommendations from a series of post-January 6 reviews, including examining the U.S. Capitol attack, a report by the U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, and the U.S. Committee on Rules, U.S. Senate Committee, Capitol Security Review, a report conducted by Lieutenant General Russell Honors Task Force, a series of flashcards by the USCP Office of the Inspector General, Government Accountability Office, architect of the Capitol's Physical Security Assessment, USCP Security Services Bureau's Complex Security Assessment, House Select Committee. They want to mention everything they're planning on doing. But let's just jump to the bigger picture on what's happening. The Daily Mail reports 6 months on from the Capitol riot, Capitol Police is setting up field offices around the U.S. This should be alarming to anybody. The expansion of federal authority typically is not a good thing, but it may be. The states will be losing some power in the long run. They don't want another civil war. They want to retain their power. And as the states become more and more divided and have completely different rules and even ideologies, they need to find a way to retain control over this. Well, as the federal government has repeatedly said that the far right is the true threat. How long until they go after people who aren't far right but right wing? How long until people like Tucker Carlson and his followers are called the far right? I mean, they already are by the left in the establishment. How long until they're considered far right extremists? Well, CNN already tried claiming that Tucker Carlson is the new Alex Jones. They already call him an extremist. They are rotating the wheel. They are pushing the Overton window further and further. Sooner or later, the Capitol Police will say that you are an extremist, and they're going to spy on you, and they're going to hunt you down, and they're going to accuse you of things. Now, maybe not. Maybe it's paranoid. But just because you're paranoid don't mean they're not after you, as the saying goes, or as the song goes. To put it mildly, if you are not vigilant, if you do not pay attention to this, that's when it gets worse. If you push back, they may say, oh, you're crazy, it's not going to happen. Yeah, only because you're saying no to the expansion of federal authority. We know exactly what happens when the intelligence agencies get expanded powers. They go on to say, 6 months after the January 6 MAGA riot, fencing remains up around the building, the Capitol building. Authorities are searching for more than 300 suspects from that day, and a third of Republican candidates in the next year's election are pushing the false claim that Trump won. More than 500 people face charges stemming from the riot, when thousands of pro-Trump supporters stormed the building to disrupt the formal certification of Joe Biden's victory. Many blame Trump for ginning up supporters with his unproven allegations. The violence led to 5 deaths. Of course, I don't think that's actually correct. The people who died at the, I think there was 3 people who died. Maybe there was 5. I could be wrong. In the aftermath, the FBI is still seeking information on more than 300 people who were among those in the Capitol hallways that day. That includes a $100,000 reward for the person who planted 2 bombs outside the offices of the Republican and Democratic National Committees the night before the riot. The Justice Department has estimated that about 800 individuals may have been involved in the January 6th attack. We can see here the severe level of security. July 4th. You may have seen a large police presence in front of the U.S. Capitol this week. This is part of our ongoing plan to increase the number of drills and exercises around campus. The FBI website on January 6th riot is filled with photos taken that day, many of which are zoomed in on the suspects still out there. The law enforcement agency asks for information on those who made unlawful entry into the U.S. Capitol building. Interestingly, there's one woman who was charged with trespassing. The only problem is the video evidence shows the police opening and holding the door for her. A lot of people simply say, if the police open the door and let you in, how could that be trespassing? It seems like what they're really looking for is an excuse to expand their power, the Daily Mail reports. The National Guard troops, however, have gone home. But magnetometers remain outside the House floor after some Republican lawmakers admitted to carrying guns in the complex. U.S. Capitol Police, meanwhile, have increased their visibility, with officers and canines conducting drills around the Capitol. This is part of our ongoing plan to increase the number of drills. We saw that one. Officers were overwhelmed by Trump supporters, we understand. Capitol Police are also opening regional offices in Florida and California to deal with threats to members of Congress. Acting USCP Chief Yogananda Pittman noted in a statement on the 6-month anniversary. Threats against lawmakers have more than doubled so far this year compared with last year, USCP noted in May. Pittman also outlined other actions the agency has taken in the past 6 months, from increasing training, recruitment, and communication to adding 2 new wellness support dogs, Lila and Philip. In response to the riot, USCP has asked for a $170 million increase in its 2022 budget compared with its fiscal year 2021 budget. That matter is still being debated among lawmakers. Partisan rancor remains high inside the marble walls of the Capitol complex, with lawmakers unable to agree on a number of issues, including a bipartisan commission to investigate what happened on January 6th. They say House Democrats last week approved a special committee to probe what happened that day, including the cause and the effects. Interestingly, I interviewed Steve Bannon. He said he was for the commission. He absolutely wants to know what happened with that event. He said violence is wrong and it's bad for us, and that these are, paraphrasing him, he said we are winning. Especially, if you look at what's going to happen on August 15th when kids start going back to school and these parents learn what these kids are being taught. He said, yeah, we'll win. So absolutely, we want the commission. We want the Democrats to reveal everything that happened. Who were these informants? Give the Republicans a chance to actually challenge some of these witnesses on their ideas. Now, I don't know exactly if that will actually play out because the Republicans seem to be blocking it. But it certainly seems like there's a big push for some kind of expanded federal police powers. The Capitol Police, well, they're supposed to be working the Capitol complex. Well, now they're going to have California and Florida offices. Think about that just for a couple of seconds. I mean, that to me is actually really fascinating. California and Florida and California, East and West Coast operations. How long until they announce they're going to be opening up in Illinois, New York, Nebraska, Wyoming, whatever? How long until we have a federal police force in major cities in every major state? Maybe not. Maybe they just want DC, Florida, and California for some reason. I don't know why Florida makes sense. I'm sure other congressional politicians get threats in other places like Illinois. I find it surprising that in Florida, just red, and surprisingly a solid blue district voted Republican, would have this issue. California, I understand, it's deep, deep blue, and people there feel powerless. What about these other cities? I think it's entirely possible we're going to start seeing this as the White House is pushing its strategy to combat domestic extremism. The New York Times reported this on June 15th. The plan highlights a shift in the U.S. approach to counterterrorism, which for decades focused on fighting foreign terrorists. They are using domestic extremism as an excuse to expand their grip over the country as a whole. Perhaps it's because they're genuinely scared a civil war could break out. And perhaps this is just the downward spiral that will lead to some kind of civil war. Republicans say that they're going to carry guns, some of them, into Congress. There are certainly some members of Congress that are pushing back and fighting, while many others are just laying down and giving up. But the fervor is still there. The anger is there, and many Republicans aren't going to just go away. These expansion of police powers and the domestic extremism plans from Joe Biden, they're going to make things worse. The New York Times reports the Biden administration on Tuesday unveiled a national strategy to combat domestic extremism, calling for aggressive steps such as hiring more intelligence analysts and screening government employees for ties to hate groups. The 32-page plan highlights a shift in the government's approach to counterterrorism, which for decades has prioritized fighting foreign terrorists. But violent attacks by American extremists are growing, a problem laid bare by the deadly Capitol riot. The only people who died at that riot were Trump supporters. Quote, "We cannot ignore this threat or wish it away," Biden wrote in the strategy document. "Preventing domestic terrorism and reducing the factors that fuel it demand a multifaceted response across the federal government and beyond." Now, could it be that the whole goal of this is to expand federal power and control over everybody? There's a fear that the federal government will give leniency to the far left, as they have in the past and as have many progressive DAs. But perhaps the real issue is they just use Antifa, useful idiots. And they use the Capitol riots. Of course, when it comes to the right, violent events are much rarer, more rare than the far left. Newsweek reports, this is from June 21st, has Joe Biden made anti-capitalism illegal? Domestic terrorism strategy explained. They go on to mention the strategy in the 32-page document we just outlined. And they mention what Joe Biden says. "We have to take both short-term steps to counter the very real threats of today and longer-term measures to diminish the emerging threats of tomorrow." They go on to say, what does the strategy propose? The 32-page report proposes various ways the U.S. can tackle domestic terrorism, but states that its main purpose is specifically on addressing violence and the factors that lead to violence. As part of the plan, in the section called Today's Threat, the administration outlines groups that it believes should be classified as DVEs, including extremists and networks whose racial, ethnic, or religious hatred leads them towards violence. The report puts an emphasis on ideologies that are rooted in the perception of the superiority of the white race, but then singles out several groups who take steps to violently resist government authority or facilitate the overthrow of the U.S. government. Classified as part of this section are anarchist violent extremists who violently oppose all forms of capitalism, corporate globalization, and governing institutions, which they perceive as harmful to society, according to the report. The strategy adds that the groups may be motivated to violence by single-issue ideologies related to abortion, animal rights, environmental, or involuntary celibate violent extremism. Okay, that one's goofy. As well as other grievances, or a combination of ideological influences. They say, why have people said the strategy would criminalize anti-capitalist beliefs? A post on Reddit on Saturday used quotes from the section describing those who oppose all forms of capitalism to argue that people who believe in that ideology would be classified as a DVE if the report became law. The post was titled, "Joe Biden's new anti-terrorism initiative classifies anarchist violent extremists," and you get the point, who oppose capitalism, etc. A majority of the commenters on the thread then criticized the strategy, with one person claiming it looks like even using rhetoric will mean you're a terrorist. The Reddit users also highlighted a definition of domestic terrorism included in a report by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on March 1st, 2021, which also included residents who oppose all forms of capitalism. Using the two reports, several of the users claimed that the Biden administration would aim to criminalize opposition to capitalism by defining those who do as DVEs. Yes. What is a terrorist? Well, they noted maybe even using the rhetoric could result in you being a terrorist. The far left, useful idiots. The people who stormed the Capitol with violence, useful idiots. It's the truth. Violence is a bad thing. Today, in order to win, we're in the era of psychological warfare. It's fourth and fifth generational warfare. You must be peaceful, persuasive, and resourceful. Instead, a bunch of very angry people thought standing inside a building would give them some kind of governmental authority, which makes literally no sense. This is the digital age. Communication is more than just whoever is standing in a building. And there you go. This gives them the excuse to expand their powers. Now, do they really need an excuse? Sort of, not really, but kind of. I say sort of, not really, but kind of in that. Now, if they want to expand their powers, they just slowly do it over time. If they want to make a bigger leap and justify it, they do something like this. You then get leftists and establishment media players who say it's a good thing they're expanding their power because of the evil rioters. But who else are they going after? Of course, they're going to go after Antifa. Maybe they won't. You know, we've long seen them give Antifa a pass because Antifa are useful idiots for them. You see, here's how it works, and here's what I warned about. As Antifa goes around smashing things up and getting away with it, regular people are going to demand more militarism, an expansion of federal powers, saying, please save me. Uh-oh. Did you think it wouldn't affect the right as well? The right is the catalyst for it. They say, those evil rioters, this is why we need all this money. But the regular people are terrorized by Black Lives Matter and Antifa, so they're saying, fine, whatever, just stop these people as well. So why was Antifa and Black Lives Matter allowed to get away with it for the most part? Because it demoralized police, created an opening for an expansion of federal authority, got regular people to demand that federal authority, and now here we are. Local police are quitting en masse across the country. They don't want to be involved in this, but regular people still want help. What do? The federal government needs to step in to save everybody. That's what's worrying. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a small expansion of federal power, because, you know, they don't keep encroaching and growing their powers. They usually give them up, right? Right. Yeah, they don't. That's the point. ABC News reported July 5th, feds warned last spring of spike in violence and extremism during pandemic. Gun violence and extremism are on the rise. Now that we have all these Second Amendment sanctuaries, how will they actually enforce gun control? Well, they're going to need a national or federal police force. They're going to need some way to go door to door and collect guns. Oh, I know. They're saying they're not confiscating your guns. It's not going to happen. They literally are. They're called red flag laws. They have been going around one by one with these red flag warrants, whatever you call, if you can even call them that, and taking people's weapons away. So yeah, they're also slowly banning many weapons. It is an expansion of government power that I find particularly worrying. Of course, we saw Facebook asking you if your friends are extremists. Is your friend an extremist? Facebook is asking some users about exposure to content. We are really, really heading towards a Chinese Communist Party style government. Fox News reports San Francisco DA official says crime surge fears linked to racism. That's right. A senior official in the SFDA's office linked fears of a crime surge to racism in a tweet that raised eyebrows Sunday evening. So I'll issue a correction. I believe earlier I said it was Chesa Bowden who said this. It was his office, an individual in his office. So I'll make sure that's clear. Kate Chatfield, a senior director in the far left DA Chesa Bowden's office, downplayed safety concerns amid a nationwide crime spike. Chatfield was reacting to a Twitter user who said, "Every single one of my friends right now is considering leaving San Francisco due to crime fears. My friends are scared for their children, and their husbands are scared for their wives." Quote, "Husbands are scared for their wives. You're a reminder that the crime surge crowd shares the same ideology as the birth of a nation," Chatfield fired back, referring to an early 20th century white supremacist film. Chatfield locked her account, making it only so her followers can see her tweets after her comment about crime fears drew sharp criticism online. Bowden's office didn't immediately return Fox News' request for comment. These are the people that are leading the charge, elected in many instances unopposed, who are ignoring the crime surge. Now, how does this make sense? It's simple. The thread that this woman was responding to about how my friends are scared, and my friends' husbands are scared for their wives. You see, this individual is saying there's a very serious crime problem, expressing how regular people don't like what's happening. Then you get the good old fall person, Chesa Bowden. He fails. Regular people are fed up. They're complaining. What do we do? How do we stop this? These people, they're coming in. They're destroying everything. I know. Perhaps we can ask the federal government for assistance. Perhaps there will be an expansion of the Capitol Police or some kind of federal protective services to go into these areas to keep them safe. Maybe the National Guard if the crime gets too bad. In New York City, the NYPD occupy street corners. Maybe a hyperbolic way of explaining it, but they do. Where I lived in the street where a black nationalist executed cops. Even with the police presence there on every corner and floodlights, these things still happened. All that really happens in the end is that you live with the cops watching your every move. The crime seems to stay the same. It doesn't really solve the problem. But you get these conservatives who don't live in these areas saying things like back the blue. Okay. But what are you going to do then when Capitol Police go to your door and say, we're here to serve a red flag warrant? Back the blue then? These cops, they went to the McCloskey's house and seized their weapons. And the McCloskeys didn't criticize them for it. Then they turn in their weapons because they were evidence in a crime, and they pleaded guilty. I see conservatives giving up to this. I see them ultimately giving in. Now, it could be that even with the left being useful idiots, they're still going to get a free pass. That's the ultimate worry that I have. Sure, there are some that are scared Joe Biden's going to come after them because they're anti-capitalists, but I don't believe so. It does, however, exist for a Republican to come in and use these laws and powers against them. You see how this works? Right now, will Joe Biden and his administration go after the far left? Probably not. Check out this story from Vice. Hackers scraped 90,000 GETTR user emails, surprising no one. No one got in trouble when they scraped Gab data. No one is likely going to get in trouble that these hackers are scraping data from GETTR, which is apparently a right-wing social media site. I don't know what it is. It's like a new kind of Twitter. Nothing's going to happen. Yet, if you look at Weave, now the guy's got deplorable views, sure. He was convicted because his friend was scraping emails off of an AT&T site. Yet when they go after Parler and Gab and GETTR, nothing is done. I'll tell you how I think it works. There's got to be a little bit of a back and forth. They can't just come out with an iron fist and crush the left and the right. Otherwise, you'll get a unified front. You'll get angry people targeting the establishment immediately. So right now you have three broad factions: pro-establishment, leftist, and right populist. Within those factions, you have a bunch of different elements, I suppose. The reason I say right populist is that there are extremist right-wingers that the conservative movement does not like, or that people on the right don't like, and they don't really fall into the right populist movement, which is, Trump and his base. They've spoken out against him, in fact. But right now, if Biden comes out and says, lock up Antifa and the Trump supporters, then Antifa and the Trump supporters are both unified against the establishment. Right now, because the establishment is going after Trump supporters, these leftist activists are ignoring it. Just like with censorship. When the big tech companies were banning people on the right, the left said, but they're private companies, and let it happen. Leftists who should have known better let it happen and said, yeah, well, it's a private company. You have no right to use it, which is a weird argument for a leftist who wants to seize the means of production, want everything to be controlled by the public. They knew that if they came out and banned left and right, then you would get a massive mainstream push against what they're doing. So long as they go after only one element of the culture war, the other side cheers for it. So what's next? Perhaps now Joe Biden will go after all of those right-wingers who dared to challenge the establishment in the federal government. The left will likely ignore it and or cheer for it. There's a journalist named Ryan Riley. He does the same thing Andy Ngo does. He posts photos of people on the right saying, here's what's happening, here's what they arrested for. Andy Ngo does that with Antifa members. Antifa threatens Andy Ngo's life. Not a conservative threatens the life of Ryan Riley. Okay, maybe some, but for Andy Ngo, it's the rule. For Ryan, it's the exception. Andy Ngo was physically beaten on more than one occasion for doing this. So we can see that the current administration has a soft spot for the left. What happens if Trump wins 2024 or DeSantis? Will that soft spot for the left exist? No. What will likely happen is then you'll see the shoe go on the other foot. All of a sudden now Antifa is going to be getting crushed. You'll probably see people on the right saying, good, fine, it's about time. Back and forth it goes, making sure that they can go after one faction on one side without upsetting the whole system. The establishment doesn't want to be in a conflict with the right and the left. They want to be in conflict with one side at a time. So, during the Trump administration, it was very much pointed at the left. During the Biden administration, it is now very much pointed at the right. Perhaps this is the natural ebb and flow. Perhaps it's the natural process by which conflict occurs in this country. And maybe it's going to eventually destabilize because you go back and forth too much, the tower collapses. Or maybe it's working out perfectly for the establishment. Donald Trump gets in 2024, or perhaps DeSantis, and then they weed the extremists that are on the left. The extremists that are on the left. They get arrested, they get charged. I mean, it didn't happen under Trump necessarily, but with this new policy pushed by Joe Biden, Trump could come out and say, oh, the anti-capitalist extremists, hey, it's Biden's policy, and now we're going to start going after them. I still think that's increasingly unlikely, but I do think they will desperately try to maintain establishment power. Establishment power, even under Trump, leans to the left, culturally, in the institutions, our government. So perhaps it won't be as bad for leftists as it is for people on the right. They'll push the Overton window further and further to the left. And then eventually conservatives will be socialists and the left will be ultra-communist, techno-communist, or whatever you want to call it. I think that's where things may be going. I want to show you just two more quick things, because this is not just me making things up. Here's an article from The Hill. Last year, they say, what current police reform efforts lack? A call to federalize. Here's a post from, this is from Andy Biggs' office, Arizona's 5th Congressional District. House Democrats vote to nationalize local police departments. He said I voted against this. The idea of a national police department is not something I made up. It may very well be coming. The Democrats are trying to seize that control at the federal level, taking away the rights from the states. We'll see. I tell you these things and I bring up these stories not to say that they're guaranteed to happen, but to show you what is happening and say you must keep paying attention to make sure you don't allow evil people to gain power. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. tonight over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.